My name is Yvonne Carter. I am 54 years old. For more than 3 decades, I worked night shifts as a nurse, double shifts on weekends, and picked up odd jobs just to keep the lights on in our small home. I raised my only son, Ethan, alone after his father walked out when Ethan was still a toddler. I have been called many things in my life: poor, tired, invisible, but never had I been called what I saw written on that wedding table card. It happened the moment I walked into the ballroom of the Duval estate, the kind of place that smelled like money, old wine, and polished marble. I carried myself with quiet pride. This was my son's wedding day. I told myself that no matter how different I looked from the silk dresses and designer suits, I belonged here because I had raised him with love and sacrifice. I found my seat at the long family table and reached for my place card. My eyes locked on the words. In gold calligraphy, it read, Yvonne Carter, but underneath, scribbled in red pen, it said, Freeloader case, out of pity. My body turned cold. I felt the letters burn into me as if someone had carved them onto my skin. I looked up and I caught the sideways glances. A few women in pearls giggled into their champagne glasses. A man in a velvet jacket leaned to whisper, and his wife's laughter burst out like a crack in glass. They were not even trying to hide it. Their eyes flicked to my shoes, my plain dress, my weathered hands, and I could hear their judgment louder than the music. I wanted to disappear, to slip out through the side door without saying a word. I could not breathe under those chandeliers. My throat felt like it was closing. I gripped the edge of the chair to steady myself. My first thought was not of anger, but of survival. Do not let them see you break. If I walked out quietly, at least I could keep my dignity. I rose slowly. My chair scraped the floor, and even that sound felt humiliating. I lowered my eyes, refusing to look at them, refusing to give them the victory of seeing tears. My hand trembled as I reached for my purse, and then I felt it. Warmth. A hand closing firmly around mine, Ethan's hand. I turned and saw my son, tall in his tuxedo, standing beside me. His jaw was set, his eyes fixed not on me but on them, the family who thought they owned him. His voice rang out steady and strong, louder than the music, louder than the whispers. Mom, we're leaving. Together. Silence fell. The laughter died instantly. I could hear nothing but the rush of my own heartbeat. Ethan pulled the wedding ring off his finger and placed it on the table in front of them. The sharp metallic tap of gold against wood echoed across the ballroom like a gavel striking. His bride's face went pale. Her father's eyes widened. Murmurs spread through the room. And before anyone could stop us, Ethan held my hand tighter and walked me out. The heavy doors of the ballroom closed behind us, shutting out the perfume, the chandeliers, the whispers. Outside, the air was cool and sharp against my face. I inhaled deeply for the first time that day. My son had chosen me, not them. The people who mocked me. The family who believed they were untouchable. They had just witnessed their perfect story collapse. The next morning, the headlines proved it. Duval Group under federal investigation. The empire that had laughed at me was unraveling. Fraud, tax evasion, falsified land deals. Their secrets were spilling across the news ticker. Mason Duval's photograph flashed on the TV with the words, "Facing scrutiny" underneath. And on the kitchen counter beside me, Ethan's phone lit up again and again. 18 missed calls from Tessa, the bride who had stood silently as her family humiliated me. He did not answer once. He placed the phone face down as if to say her voice no longer had power here. I watched the morning sun spill across the table onto the simple cup of tea I had poured for myself, and I thought, they believed they could strip me of dignity with a place card. They believed their power was untouchable. But what they never understood is this. Quiet dignity does not vanish when mocked. It waits, it endures, and sometimes it rises with a strength they never saw coming. So that was how it began. A place card meant to shame me turned into the opening crack in their empire, and from that crack, everything they built would soon fall apart. Friend, if you have ever been underestimated, laughed at, or told you were only here out of pity, stay with me. This story is not only about loss or humiliation, it is about how quiet strength can become justice, how love can become power, and how dignity, once reclaimed, can turn the world upside down. When the news anchor's voices faded into the background, I found myself staring out the window, the quiet of my small kitchen filling the space. My son's wedding was supposed to be a celebration, but what remained in my heart was the echo of laughter that wasn't kind. I tried to steady myself with a cup of tea, letting the steam brush my face. And as I sat there, my mind traveled backward, as it often does, to the years that shaped me. I was 26 when Ethan's father walked away. He left without warning, without apology, leaving me with a child in diapers and bills that stacked up faster than I could count. That night, I rocked my son to sleep while I cried silently, promising him he would never feel abandoned, even if I did. By the next morning, I had already called the hospital to pick up extra shifts. From then on, nights became my world. For years, I worked the emergency ward. The hours stretched into endless corridors of pain and urgency. Patients came in broken, bleeding, crying for help. I stitched wounds, changed IVs, comforted mothers who thought they would lose their children. At dawn, when my shift ended, I hurried to another job, cleaning offices before the staff arrived. By midday, stood behind the counter at a diner, refilling coffee cups for truck drivers and worn-out travelers. My feet swelled, my back ached, but I carried on, because every dollar meant Ethan could eat, could grow, could have shoes that fit, and notebooks without torn pages. Sometimes I would come home after 30 hours straight, my body shaking with exhaustion. I would find Ethan sitting on the floor, playing with blocks, waiting for me. The moment his eyes lit up, the pain melted. He didn't see the sweat on my face or the cracks in my hands. He saw his mother, the center of his world, and that was enough to keep me going. There was one object I always kept close, a worn photo album. Inside, tucked between faded pictures of birthday cakes and first days of school, there was a handwritten note I once scribbled during a night when I felt like collapsing. It said, "My son will not grow up in pity. He will grow up in dignity." Whenever I opened that album, I reminded myself that my sacrifices were not signs of weakness. They were proof of love. They were the foundation of the future I was building. And yet, in that ballroom, surrounded by chandeliers and designer gowns, they dared to reduce me to nothing more than a freeloader. They did not know the nights I bled from cracked heels, the mornings I pressed a cold washcloth against my swollen eyes before heading to the hospital. They did not know how many times I turned down meals so Ethan could eat first. To them, I was invisible, but I knew better. The truth of who I was lived in the quiet acknowledgments of people who had seen me at my most human. Like the neighbor down the street, Mrs. Alvarez. Every morning when I dragged myself home, uniform wrinkled, eyes burning from fluorescent lights, she would wave to me from her porch. "Morning, Yvonne," she would say, her voice carrying a kindness that asked for nothing. It was not pity, it was recognition. She saw me. She respected me. That wave reminded me that I had value, even when the world wanted to strip it away. I think about her wave when I remember the laughter in that ballroom. Two gestures so different, one cruel, meant to humiliate, the other simple, meant to affirm. Both told me the truth of where I stood. I may not own marble floors or family empires, but I had survived with integrity. I had raised a boy who, when faced with the choice between power and love, chose love. That was not the story of a freeloader. That was the story of resilience. So when I look back on those years, Nights spent with crying patients, days spent wiping counters, evenings spent balancing bills by the dim kitchen light. I no longer see suffering. I see strength. I see a mother who refused to let abandonment define her. I see the quiet dignity that could not be erased, not by exhaustion, not by poverty, and certainly not by a place card with cruel words. The album still sits on my shelf, its pages worn from years of handling, and every time I open it, I see that promise I wrote in shaky handwriting. My son will not grow up in pity. He will grow up in dignity. That line carried me through the darkest nights. It carried me into that ballroom, and even when they tried to laugh me out of existence, it carried me through the door with my son's hand holding mine. That is the truth they never understood. My life has never been about pity. My life has always been about dignity, and dignity, once claimed, can never be stolen. The night before the wedding plays in my mind like a reel I cannot pause. The rehearsal dinner at the Duval estate felt less like a family gathering and more like a board meeting wrapped in linen and crystal. The vineyard room glowed with votive candles. A jazz trio brushed out polite rhythms while servers slipped past with trays of seared lamb. I stood near the stone fireplace, a guest but not of their world, hands folded to stop the tremor I could already feel rising in my wrists. Mason Duval worked the room like a senator. His cufflinks caught the light as he clapped shoulders and delivered short, confident laughs. I watched him drift toward Aaron Pike, the company's numbers man, the type who wears a smile that never touches his eyes. They leaned together beside a tower of macaroons. Mason spoke softly, but arrogance travels. I heard enough. Once he is family, we move the paperwork. Municipal parcels need a clean signature. Optics are everything. A good son-in-law signs. Celeste arrived a moment later, perfume thick as roses after rain. She eyed the room like a curator guarding a private collection. "Ethan is earnest," she said lightly, "but some boys never cut the apron strings. One can always tell by the shoes." She looked at my plain pumps as if they were a social sin. Aaron chuckled, a sound like coins falling into a jar. I held my gaze level and said nothing. I have learned that silence can be a shield when words would only feed the fire. At the head table, Tessa adjusted the napkin in her lap. Her hands were steady, but her knuckles were white. Ethan slipped into the seat beside her, jaw set a fraction tighter than usual. He kissed her cheek for the crowd, then reached under the table. I saw his fingers find hers. The band shifted to a standard. Glass chimed. Mason raised a toast about legacy, loyalty, and the family enterprise that had lifted this city more than once. Then came the line meant to sound harmless. "Tomorrow we celebrate love. Next week we sign what keeps this family strong. Ethan will help us keep things moving. We pull together here." Laughter followed, practiced and polite. Ethan did not laugh. His eyes moved to me across the room, steady and unreadable. He offered the smallest nod, almost a bow. I recognized it. The boy who absorbed before he acted, the man who files every detail in the exact drawer it belongs. I lifted my water glass in return. The distance between us felt like a tightrope. Neither of us looked down. Later, in the corridor that led to the terrace, I met Tessa alone. She had draped a shawl over her shoulders, though the night was warm. "You look lovely, Miss Carter," she said, and for a beat the performance fell away. A young woman stood in its place, eyes soft and frightened. "My father is intense. He means well. He just believes in order." She swallowed. "Any talk about business is separate from us." I heard the pleading in that line, a hope that love could live in a house built on control. "I hope so," I said. I did not add that control rarely learns to whisper. It prefers a stage. Tessa reached as if to touch my arm, then stopped. "Tomorrow will be beautiful," she said. "Please try to enjoy it." She returned to the room before I could answer. When I stepped back inside, Celeste's voice floated above a knot of relatives. Some families are comfortable in city chambers, others in break rooms. Both have their place." She smiled, delicate as a blade. Someone snorted. My cheeks flushed hot. I forced my breath into measured counts. Ethan appeared behind the group, catching only the tail of the joke, but he caught the tone completely. He looked at his shoes, then he looked at mine, then he looked at his future mother-in-law. The line of his mouth flattened. He crossed to me and offered the familiar signal we used when he was little and needed to leave a room that did not want us. "Dessert, Mom. Let me bring you a plate." He returned with a plate he set on a side table, untouched. We stood as the room swelled with another toast. "Are you all right?" I asked quietly. "I am listening," he said. "That is all for tonight." No anger, no scene, just a record being made in the quiet ledger he kept behind his eyes. On our way out, Aaron brushed past with a leather folder tucked under his arm. A tab peeked out labeled Addenda. Another read, Parcels. Mason's laughter followed him like a shadow. I held the door for a server and stepped into the night air. The vineyard stretched to a dark ridge, and the breeze carried the scent of cut grass and distant water. Ethan joined me under the string lights. For a while, we said nothing. In that silence, I felt the shift, the invisible hinge turning. They believed they had an obedient signature waiting at the altar. My son had heard them clearly. He had filed it where it belonged. And I had too. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers, their light bouncing across polished marble like 1,000 tiny spotlights. The scent of roses mixed with expensive perfume, heavy enough to make me dizzy. I walked carefully between rows of tables, my heels clicking softly until I reached the one marked Family. I wanted to believe for one fragile moment that this would finally be the place where I belonged. I leaned closer and saw my name. The card was thick, ivory stock, with elegant gold calligraphy. Yvonne Carter. For a breath, pride swelled in me. I thought of Ethan, the boy who once clutched my hand on his first day of school, now a man about to marry. But then I noticed what had been added below in sharp red ink. Freeloader case. Out of pity. The words punched the air from my lungs. My fingers trembled as I picked up the card, tracing the letters as if my touch could erase them. A low chuckle rose from across the table. A woman with a diamond bracelet leaned into her husband. I caught the cruel curl of her smile as she whispered. Their laughter was not loud, but it was sharp enough to cut skin. Another guest shifted in his chair, eyes sliding down to my shoes, plain, worn, but clean, and then back up to me with a smirk that said everything without a word. I felt the blood rise in my cheeks. The chandeliers above seemed to hum louder, and for a moment I thought the whole room could hear the thundering of my heart. My instinct was to leave quietly, to let the moment pass without giving them a show. I have lived my life knowing when silence protects more than words. I set the card back on the table, straightened my shoulders, and pushed the chair behind me. The legs scraped against marble, a sound that felt like a confession. My throat tightened, my chest ached with the effort of not breaking. I told myself, do not give them tears. Do not give them what they want. My hand reached for my purse. I could already see the exit in my mind, the double doors that would carry me out of their world. Then came the weight of another hand. Ethan's hand, firm, unshaking, pulling mine back before I could take a step. I turned, startled, and met his eyes. They were steady, burning not with shame, but with something fiercer, defiance. His jaw clenched as he looked around the table, at the people who believed they owned the story of his life. His voice was clear, unbroken. "Mom, we're leaving. Together." The music stuttered. Conversations died mid-sentence. In that instant, the laughter that had filled the room drained away, leaving only silence thick enough to drown in. Ethan slipped the wedding ring from his finger and placed it on the table beside the cursed place card. The sound of gold striking wood was small, but it echoed through the room like a bell tolling at a funeral. Guests gasped. Someone dropped a fork. Tessa's face blanched. Her painted smile collapsed into something fragile and terrified. Mason Duval rose halfway from his chair, words caught in his throat. Celeste pressed her pearls, eyes wide as if clutching them would hold together the crumbling facade. But my son did not wait for their permission. He tightened his grip on my hand and guided me away from the table, from the chandeliers, from the hollow laughter. Our footsteps fell in rhythm across the marble floor, not hurried, not ashamed, but measured and sure, like a march toward freedom. Each step felt heavier than the last, yet lighter than anything I had carried in years. We passed rows of stunned faces, some sympathetic, most stunned into silence. No one moved to stop us. No one dared. My eyes stayed forward, fixed on the tall double doors. I would not look back. The sound of our shoes against the floor was the only music left. As the doors opened, cool night air swept in, carrying the scent of grass and freedom. The noise of the ballroom dulled behind us. I inhaled deeply, feeling the tightness in my chest release. The humiliation etched in red ink was still inside me, but it no longer defined me. In that moment, dignity was no longer something I was trying to protect. It was something Ethan had placed back in my hands. The doors closed with a gentle thud. The chandeliers, the whispers, the cruel smiles, they were on the other side now. Beside me was my son, standing taller than I had ever seen him. Together, we walked into the night, leaving behind the empire that thought it could write our story on a place card. And with every step away, I realized something. Silence is not weakness. Sometimes silence is the only weapon left, and sometimes it is enough to win. The kitchen felt smaller that night. The ceiling light hummed. The porcelain clock ticked like a metronome for a life that had changed tempo. I set the kettle on and wiped the table out of habit. My hands needed work to quiet the tremor I could not hide. Ethan placed his briefcase on the chair and opened it with a calm that told me he had planned for this hour. "Sit with me, Mom," he said. He drew out folders held by binder clips. Labeled tabs lined the edges. Draft, addenda, parcels, vendor ledgers. He spread them across the scarred wood like maps before a long drive. I poured hot water into 2 cups. Steam rose. I took the seat across from him. He lifted the first folder. Inside lay contract drafts on Duval letterhead. Several pages wore red notes that were not his handwriting. He pointed to the signature lines. They were blank. I did not sign anything. I kept every piece of evidence. His voice was level, the kind born of solid ground. He turned the page. Scanned invoices from a shell vendor glared under kitchen light. Unit prices were bloated. Delivery dates were impossible. A spreadsheet cross-referenced parcel numbers with municipal files. Parcels marked for community use were treated as private holdings. Ethan tapped the margins he had highlighted. "These are the fraud patterns Aaron pushes," he said. "Round amounts, backdated approvals, the same handwriting across entities." He opened a second folder, internal emails printed and preserved. Phrases like expedite optics and consolidate approvals rose from the page. "They expected me to be a polite signature," he said. "They expected me to play along." He slid a black flash drive toward me. "Every file is mirrored and time-stamped, stored off-site. If this house burns, the truth still stands." I cupped my tea and studied my son. "How far does this go?" I asked. He considered, then answered with care. "Far enough. To bring scrutiny. Far enough that they should not push another deal. Not far enough to crush workers who had no say." He met my eyes. "We do this right, Mom." The kettle hissed. Ethan reached for another envelope, thicker, sealed with a blue clip. "Prenup," he said. "Their version ties my assets to their oversight. My attorney wrote a counter that keeps everything separate. I have not signed, neither has Tessa. Nothing is commingled. Every dollar I contributed to wedding logistics or deposit sits in a quarantined account in my name. It can be withdrawn without penalty. I let out a breath I had been holding since the ballroom. "You were ready," I said. He nodded. From the moment I heard Mason treat municipal parcels like heirlooms, I will not be their cover. I will not be their clerk. He unlocked his phone and showed me a secure drive. Folders labeled evidence, contracts, escrow. If they force a narrative, I can demonstrate non-participation and deliver these to the proper office, he said. But the better move is measured. We disclose what stops harm. We protect people they would trample on the way down. The phone lit with a banner from Tessa. He turned it face down. "This is not about punishing her," he said. "She lives inside their gravity. Maybe one day she will choose a different orbit." "What happens to the quarantined funds?" I asked. He looked out at the quiet street. "We build something clean," he said. "A community fund for health access and scholarships, the kind of help that keeps a kid from feeling small when the world says he is nothing. We turn their leverage into relief. Part of me wanted quiet, part wanted justice. The better part wanted repair." I touched the edge of a contract. Paper rasped under my finger. "If we do this," I said, "we do it without cruelty." "Without cruelty," he agreed. "With boundaries, with proof." We signed nothing that night. We made only decisions. I labeled folders, he sealed the flash drive in a tin and slid it behind the flour canister. The kettle went silent. The clock kept ticking. I reached across the table. He set his hand over mine, the same way he had in the ballroom, only steadier now. Through the window, the street looked ordinary. A dog barked, a car door shut. That is how truth arrives. Not with fanfare, with footsteps on kitchen tile, with the patient work of choosing what is right when no one is watching. The house was quiet, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the steady ticking of the wall clock above the kitchen door. Papers from Ethan's briefcase still covered the table, each folder neatly stacked after we had reviewed them. The kettle had cooled. My tea sat untouched, a thin film forming on the surface. It was the kind of silence that should have been peaceful, but peace refused to come. Ethan's phone lit up again. The vibration rattled against the wood table, sharp and insistent. I looked at the screen even though I told myself I wouldn't. Her name glowed in white letters. Tessa. Call after call, one after another, filling the log until the number at the top read 18. The sound was relentless, as though the weight of her family's empire could be condensed into one desperate ringtone. I stared at it and felt the pull inside me. Part of me wanted to answer. I wanted to hear her voice, to know if she had chosen those cruel words written on my place card, to ask why she had stayed silent while I stood humiliated. Maybe she had an explanation. Maybe she had been afraid of her parents, just as I had once been afraid of poverty, swallowing us whole. I thought of her young face at the rehearsal dinner, the shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, her eyes pleading when she told me to enjoy tomorrow. Was there some truth inside her that wanted to break free? But then another part of me tightened like a fist. Dignity does not bargain. It does not wait for explanations whispered too late. The silence she had chosen in that ballroom was her answer. The laughter had been her company, and my son's hand in mine had already carried me through the door. The phone buzzed again. 18 missed calls now. The sound clawed at the corners of my patience. I reached for it, held it in my palm. The glass felt cold, heavier than it should have. My thumb hovered over the green icon, my chest rising and falling with the weight of decision. Listen or silence, mercy or boundary. I could not pretend the choice was easy. Years of being overlooked had trained me to listen even when it hurt, to absorb cruelty in exchange for the smallest hope of peace. But this was different. This was not about peace. This was about self-respect. I set the phone face down on the table. The buzzing dulled against the wood, muffled and distant like a storm outside a closed door. I let the silence grow. I rose from the chair and walked to the living room. On the shelf above the couch sat the old photo album, its corners worn, the plastic sleeves clouded from years of use. I pulled it down and opened it carefully. The pages cracked faintly. There was Ethan, gape-toothed in his first-grade portrait. There he was again in his high school jersey, hair messy, eyes shining with determination. I turned to the page I had looked at more times than I could count, the one where a note in my own handwriting was tucked beside a photograph of him as a boy. My son will not grow up in pity. He will grow up in dignity. I traced those words with my finger, just as I had traced the cruel words on the place card. The difference struck me like lightning. One line had been written by those who sought to break me. The other had been written by a woman who refused to surrender. The phone buzzed again, faint through the wall. I whispered to myself, voice steady this time, silence is also an answer. I closed the album and held it to my chest. My hands no longer shook. The laughter in that ballroom felt distant now, like echoes from another life. What mattered was the promise on the page, the hand of my son leading me through those doors, and the knowledge that I did not need to chase explanations from people who had already revealed who they were. The night stretched on. Outside, the street lamps cast long shadows across the quiet neighborhood. A dog barked in the distance. The phone eventually stopped vibrating. I sat back down at the table, the album still in my lap, and allowed myself to breathe. For the first time in many years, I chose silence, not out of fear, but out of strength. And in that silence, I found the beginnings of peace. The morning light crept through the blinds, thin stripes of gold cutting across the kitchen table, where the evidence still lay in neat piles. The house was quiet, except for the sound of the local news anchor spilling words that carried more weight than any chandeliered toast from the night before. "Breaking news," her voice declared, steady and sharp. Federal investigators have confirmed a review of Duval Group's municipal contracts. Questions over inflated land valuations and missing funds have prompted an emergency inquiry. The screen flashed images of Mason Duval, stiff in his navy suit, rushing through the glass doors of the company headquarters. Reporters shouted questions he ignored. Celeste trailed behind, pearls gleaming against the cameras, her expression pinched but carefully controlled. The headline at the bottom of the screen read, "Duval Group Faces Scrutiny." I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup, letting the warmth steady me. I had expected whispers, not a broadcast ticker that crawled across the screen in bold letters. Ethan walked in, his hair still damp from the shower, and placed his phone on the counter. He didn't look rattled. He looked prepared. "They called a board meeting at dawn," he said. "Emergency session. Everyone's scrambling." The phone buzzed once. A text message appeared across the screen, her name glowing like a signal flare. Celeste. I read the first line before Ethan turned it away. "We should meet. This doesn't have to be hostile. We can protect each other's dignity if you cooperate." I let the words hang in the air like smoke. Protect dignity. The same family that scribbled Freeloader under my name now wanted to barter respect like a business clause. My lips pressed into a thin line. I said nothing, and Ethan didn't press me for an answer. He only turned the phone face down on the counter. Silence spoke louder. The anchor continued, listing parcels and numbers, hinting at grand juries and subpoenas. Mason's voice appeared in a clip from the courthouse steps. "This is a misunderstanding. We are a pillar of this community. We will resolve this matter quickly." His jaw twitched even as he tried to smile. I recognized that twitch. It was the tremor of a man who built towers on shaky ground and finally heard the crack. Ethan poured himself coffee and sat across from me. "They'll try to spin it," he said, voice calm. "They'll say it's politics. They'll blame some mid-level accountant, but the paper trail is too loud. He sipped and set the mug down gently, as if he were measuring the weight of each move in advance. I wanted to ask what would happen to Tessa, but the words never left my throat. Instead, I turned toward the window. Outside, the street looked ordinary. Children pedaled bikes, the garbage truck clanged its way down the block, and Mrs. Alvarez from 2 doors down walked up my front steps, carrying a covered plate. I opened the door before she could knock. "Morning, Yvonne," she said, holding out a plate wrapped in foil. "I made sweet bread this morning. Thought you might like some." Her voice was soft, genuine. No pretense, no performance, just kindness. I accepted the plate, warm against my palms, and for a moment the noise from the television faded. The contrast struck me. The night before, pearls clinking and laughter slicing me open. Now a neighbor offering bread, wordless proof that dignity isn't given by the powerful, but by those who see you without judgment. "Thank you," I said, my throat tight. She smiled and waved off my gratitude. "You've done enough for this block over the years. Just rest today." She turned and walked down the steps, leaving behind the simple smell of sugar and cinnamon. I carried the plate into the kitchen and set it beside the folders of contracts and forged invoices. Warmth beside cold ink, nourishment beside fraud. The juxtaposition made me breathe easier. Ethan reached for a piece and smiled faintly. "This tastes like home," he said. On the screen, Mason's voice barked about protecting legacy. But in my kitchen, legacy felt like something else entirely. A neighbor's kindness, a son's steady resolve, and the knowledge that dignity cannot be bought or sold in a boardroom. It is lived in the smallest acts, often unnoticed, but powerful enough to outlast any empire. I sliced into the bread, poured another cup of coffee, and let the silence speak for us. The Duval Empire was cracking, and we were still here, whole. We met Nora Hale the same afternoon, the plate of sweetbread still warm in my bag, the television still murmuring about subpoenas as we locked the front door. Nora worked out of a second-floor office above a pharmacy. No marble, no art meant to impress, only a wall of case files and a ficus that had survived more winters than most partnerships. Her handshake was dry, her eyes clear, the kind that measured risk before it measured ego. She listened without interrupting while Ethan laid the folders on her desk in calm stacks. Draft contracts on Duval letterhead, shell invoices with impossible delivery dates, parcel maps that did not match municipal records, printed emails that said too much for men who thought they were untouchable. Nora did not frown or gasp. She traced the margins with a capped pen, then pushed a yellow legal pad toward us. 2 tracks, she said. Regulatory disclosure and criminal exposure. We control what we control. You are not vigilantes. You are witnesses. We will disclose only what stops the bleeding. She sketched a list as she spoke. Chain of custody for the flash drive, off-site copies, timestamps preserved. A packet for the Municipal Inspector General, a second for the State Attorney General, a narrow set for federal review focused on the parcels that risked public harm. She circled 3 names of low-level clerks that appeared on multiple forms. "We ask for carve-outs," she said. "Non-prosecution agreements for workers who cooperate in good faith. They signed what they were handed. We do not grind." I felt my shoulders ease. It mattered that someone in this room would fight for people who could not afford counsel. Nora kept going. "Media can wait. No exclusive interviews. You are not the story. The repairs are the story. We also keep family drama out of filings. Judges hate theatrics." She looked at Ethan. "No contact with Mason or Celeste. All communication through counsel. If Tessa reaches out about personal closure, you may choose compassion. You will not negotiate facts." Ethan nodded. "We also set up a fund," he said. "The quarantined wedding money, scholarships, and health access." Nora drew a box around that sentence. Good, but structure it cleanly. Separate entity, independent board, audited annually. If you want credibility, you invite scrutiny." She turned to me. "Mrs. Carter, you are the most credible person in this ecosystem. You have nothing to prove. That is precisely why juries believe people like you. Let your dignity do the heavy lifting. Speak plainly when asked. Say less than you think. Never guess." I stared at my hands and saw the small nicks left by years of hospital sinks and cheap soap. "Dignity is not revenge," I said. "I need to know we are not burning down someone who could have been saved." Nora replied, "We are drawing boundaries with light. The ones who knew will stand out when the room is bright." We signed retention letters. Ethan executed a custodial affidavit for the evidence. Nora photographed each folder's index and sealed them in tamper bags. She printed a short script for potential calls from reporters. "We cooperate with lawful inquiries. We will not try this case in public. Our focus is protecting the public interest." Simple words, solid rails. Before we left, Nora asked one more question. "When this gets uglier, and it will, what do you want to be true about yourselves a year from now?" Ethan answered first, that we did not lie. She looked at me. I said, "That we protected people without power." Nora nodded. Then every choice bends toward those two sentences. She handed me her card. The ink had smudged slightly where the phone number sat. "Call me before you call anyone else." Back on the stairwell, the pharmacy smell rose through the railing. Eucalyptus and rubbing alcohol, clean and faintly sweet. I thought about the ballroom's perfume and the neighbor's bread, the two versions of what people think respect looks like. One tried to purchase it with gold settings. The other baked it at dawn and brought it warm to a door. At the curb, Ethan unlocked the car and opened my door. "We know the plan," he said, measured, not cruel. I fastened my seatbelt and watched a bus sigh to a stop across the street. "Dignity comes with responsibility," I said. "We carry both, or we carry neither." He nodded once, and for the first time all day, I felt steady. The press conference took place on a gray Tuesday morning, the kind where clouds pressed low against the skyline and the air smelled faintly of rain. We stood behind a plain wooden podium set up outside the community center, not a hotel ballroom or corporate atrium. Reporters clustered with microphones, their cameras pointed at Ethan. He wore a dark suit, simple, without flash. I stood a step behind him, hands folded, the plate of sweet bread from Mrs. Alvarez still waiting back home on our counter. Ethan adjusted the microphone and looked across the crowd. The murmurs quieted. His voice carried, steady but warm. "Thank you for being here. I want to speak directly and plainly. In the last week, questions have been raised about my connection to the Duval family and their business practices. I will clarify. I was asked to sign contracts and a prenuptial agreement that would have bound me to financial structures I did not create. I refused. I signed nothing. Every asset I brought into that marriage remained separate." He paused, letting the words settle. Camera shutters clicked like rain against tin. "The funds I contributed to the wedding were quarantined in escrow. Today, I am announcing that those funds will be used to launch the Carter Community Fund. Our mission is simple: provide access to healthcare and scholarships for families who, like mine, know the cost of sacrifice." Reporters leaned forward. One asked if this was retaliation against the Duvals. Ethan shook his head. "This is not revenge. This is responsibility. Money that would have served vanity will instead serve dignity. That is the choice we are making." I watched his jaw tighten slightly as he continued. "We will operate as a non-profit trust, independent audits, an external board, and full transparency. I will not control it alone. My mother and I will co-sign its founding, but governance will belong to the community. Every dollar will be accounted for. Every decision will be public." The wind shifted. A woman in the crowd pulled her coat tighter. Another reporter called out, "Ethan, do you regret leaving the wedding?" His answer came fast. I regret nothing. A marriage built on deceit is not a marriage. My mother deserved respect, and when she was denied it, I chose the only path left, to walk away with her. At that, all eyes turned briefly to me. I felt the weight of the cameras, the lenses hungry for tears or rage. I gave them neither. I stood still, spine straight, and only nodded once. It was enough. Silence can be louder than a speech when it carries truth. Ethan concluded, "This fund will begin its first projects within 30 days. We will focus on medical supplies for local clinics and scholarships for students in underfunded schools. It is not charity. It is equity. My mother taught me that dignity does not come from titles or tables at grand weddings. It comes from showing up every day for the people who depend on you." He stepped back. The questions rose in a chorus. Names, numbers, accusations. But Nora, standing at the edge, guided us off the podium. Reporters shouted after us. Flashes lit the gray sky. I did not look back. My silence was my statement. Inside the center, the noise dulled. Ethan unbuttoned his jacket and exhaled. "We did it," he said softly. I touched his arm, steadying both of us. I did not need to speak. The echo of my promise from long ago hummed inside me. My son will not grow up in pity. He will grow up in dignity. As we left through the side door, a young reporter managed to catch my eye. She asked, almost gently, "Mrs. Carter, do you need the public to recognize you after all that has happened?" I stopped for a moment, then answered clearly, "I do not need anyone's recognition to know I am a mother." Her pen froze mid-air. The words hung there, unadorned, like a bell ringing in still air. That was enough. 2 days after the press conference, the knock came just after sunset. The porch light glowed against the fading sky, and when I opened the door, Tessa stood there. She wore no makeup, her hair pulled into a loose knot, her eyes swollen from nights without rest. For a moment, she looked less like the poised bride of the Duval Empire, and more like a young woman caught in a storm she could not control. "Mrs. Carter," she whispered, "please, I need to talk." I hesitated, then stepped aside. She crossed the threshold, clutching her shawl as though the house were colder than the night outside. We sat at the kitchen table where Ethan's folders still lingered, stacked in neat piles. She glanced at them but did not speak of them. Instead, she pressed her palms flat against the wood and stared down. "I did not write those words on your place card," she said quickly. "I swear I didn't. I saw them before you did, but Her voice broke. "I didn't stop it. I didn't stand up. I was afraid of my parents. I thought keeping quiet would keep the peace. But I see now that silence is just another kind of cruelty." Her tears came, sharp and sudden. For a moment I felt the old reflex rising, the instinct to comfort, to soften, to forgive. But forgiveness has to come after. Truth, not before it. I kept my hands folded in my lap. My voice was calm. "Tessa, I am not the one you need to apologize to. You need to apologize to yourself for choosing fear over dignity." She blinked at me, stunned by the words. Silence filled the space again. Ethan entered quietly, carrying a slim envelope. He set it gently on the table between them. "This is a cease and desist," he said, his tone even. "It covers contact, business interference, and any attempt to harass or manipulate my mother or me. You are free to choose your own life, but you are not free to cross our boundaries anymore." Tessa's hands shook as she lifted the envelope. She nodded slowly, as if accepting not just the paper, but the line it represented. When she rose to leave, her shoulders sagged, but there was no defiance in her eyes, only a tired kind of clarity. She stepped out into the evening without another word. I thought that was the end of it, but Mason's message arrived the next morning. A terse email, private conversation, no press, no lawyers, 10 o'clock, the Meridian Hotel, Suite 904. Ethan frowned when he read it. "He wants leverage," he said. "I'll go with you." but I shook my head. This one is mine. The suite was all glass and leather, city skyline stretching wide behind him. Mason rose when I entered, a practiced smile fixed in place. He gestured toward the table where a folder sat, thick with papers. "Mrs. Carter," he began, "this has been difficult for all of us. The press feeds on scandal. We both know that, but there's no need for you or your son to remain entangled. This folder outlines a settlement, substantial, generous. In exchange, you withhold documents and refrain from further cooperation. Everyone walks away whole." I studied him. His cufflinks gleamed, his voice smooth, but his eyes betrayed him. Restless, darting like a cornered animal. I let the silence stretch until he shifted in his chair. Then I spoke. "You think dignity is something you can purchase. You think silence is a commodity. But you are mistaken." I pushed the folder back across the table without opening it. My voice stayed steady. "Dignity is not for sale. Not mine. Not my son's. Not anymore." The smile slipped from his face. For the first time, Mason looked smaller, his frame diminished against the vast window. He reached for words but found none. I stood, smoothing my coat, and turned toward the door. As I left, I felt no triumph, no gloating, only certainty. The reversal was complete. The man who once believed he could humiliate me with ink on a place card was now the one left silent in a room too large for his pride. Back on the street, the wind carried the scent of rain. I breathed it in deeply, steady and unbroken. Boundaries had been set. The past no longer held us. And for the first time in years, the future felt entirely our own. The first event of the Carter Community Fund was held on a clear Saturday morning at Oak Ridge Park, a stretch of grass and cracked basketball courts only 3 blocks from the duplex where Ethan and I once lived. Folding tables lined the walkway, stacked with refurbished blood pressure monitors, glucose kits, and simple tablets loaded with health literacy software. Volunteers in bright vests arranged boxes while families with strollers and kids on bikes trickled in. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and cinnamon rolls from a food truck parked nearby. I stood at the edge of the tent, the banner above us fluttering in the wind. It read, "Carter Community Fund, Equity, Not Charity." The words made my chest tighten, not with grief, but with something new, pride without apology. Ethan moved easily among the volunteers, shaking hands, giving instructions, lifting boxes himself when no one else was nearby. He had always been quiet, deliberate, but here he carried himself with a steady authority that came not from borrowed power, but from earned trust. When it was time to speak, he stepped up to the microphone. "This fund exists," he said, "because money meant for vanity can become something else. Dignity, opportunity, health. These supplies are not handouts, they are tools. Tools for families who already fight hard, who already endure, who deserve the same access as anyone sitting in a glass tower." The crowd clapped, not politely but genuinely. A few teenagers by the basketball court even stopped playing to listen. Ethan kept his speech short, only a few minutes. He thanked the volunteers, the community leaders, and finally me. "I learned resilience from my mother," he said. "She showed me that dignity is not given, it is lived, and today we live it together." All eyes turned to me again, cameras ready, expecting words. But I did not step forward. I simply nodded, letting my silence be enough. In that moment, silence was not retreat. It was strength. After the speeches ended, people lined up at the tables. Mothers tested blood pressure cuffs on their children's arms. Fathers signed forms for scholarship applications. Volunteers explained how to use the tablets, their voices animated with hope. I moved quietly among them, answering small questions, handing out forms, smiling when needed. Then she appeared, a teenager in a faded hoodie with the words, "Future Nurse," across the front. Her hair was buzzed short, her backpack frayed at the straps. She looked at me directly without hesitation and asked, "Can I take a picture with you?" For a moment, I froze. I had never been asked that before. Cameras at the press conference wanted a headline, not a memory, but this girl wanted something else, proof that someone like me could stand at the center of a story without apology. "Yes," I said softly. She handed her phone to a friend, then stood beside me. As the picture was taken, I felt the corners of my eyes crinkle. Not a practiced smile, not the strained mask I had worn at the wedding. This was different. This was light breaking through. I smiled with my eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly lighter. When she looked at the photo, she whispered, "Thank you." Her voice carried more weight than all the chandeliers of the Duval estate. The event lasted hours. By afternoon, most of the supplies had been distributed, and the park buzzed with laughter, conversation, and the sound of sneakers on pavement. Ethan gathered volunteers for a quick debrief, his face flushed with energy. I stood back, watching, my heart full in a way I had not expected. It struck me then. Healing does not come in grand gestures. It comes in mornings like this, with simple tools passed hand to hand, with a teenager smiling because she can imagine a different future. Healing comes when silence is no longer about fear, but about choosing when and how to speak. As the tables emptied and the volunteers packed up, I stood under the tent, looking out across the park. I inhaled deeply, letting the breeze carry away the last traces of shame from that ballroom. For the first time, the weight on my chest lifted. I walked to Ethan as he finished loading boxes into a van. He caught my eye and asked quietly, "You all right, Mom?" I answered honestly, "Yes, for the first time in years, I am." And I meant it. The place card still sat in the bottom drawer of my dresser. The cruel ink faded but not forgotten. Some nights, when the house was quiet, I would take it out and hold it between my fingers. Ivory stock, heavy, expensive, meant to impress, meant to last. Across the top, my name in gold calligraphy, Yvonne Carter. And beneath it, scrawled in harsh red, the words that had tried to cut me down. Fake Mom. One evening, I reached for a pen, steady in my hand. Slowly, deliberately, I drew a line through the insult. Over it, in firm letters, I wrote, "The only mom." I set the card back on the dresser, no longer a weapon, but a witness, a record of what I had survived, and a reminder of the truth no one could erase. A year passed, seasons turned, and the Carter Community Fund grew roots in places I had once walked past with heavy steps. Clinics received supplies, scholarships were awarded, and families carried hope where before there had only been waiting. The work did not make headlines every day, but it made mornings easier for people who needed relief. That was enough. One crisp autumn afternoon, I stood at the podium of a community college auditorium. Rows of students filled the seats, notebooks open, eyes curious. I told them about resilience, about the power of silence when used as strength, about how dignity is not granted from outside but cultivated within. "I am not here to teach you economics," I said. "I am here to remind you that every sacrifice matters. Every moment you show up, even when no one notices, builds something that cannot be taken away." When the talk ended, the applause rolled like a soft wave. Some students rose to shake my hand. Others simply nodded, as if carrying pieces of my story into their own. I left the auditorium quietly, stepping into the cool air outside. Across the street, a billboard rose above the gas station where Ethan and I once counted quarters to buy fuel. The background was deep blue, the letters white and bold. It read, "Dignity, not charity, Carter Fund." No glossy images, no corporate slogans, just truth, clear and unadorned. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, watching the cars pass beneath it. The billboard was not for me. It was for the people who drove by tired, who wondered if their sacrifices mattered. It was for the ones who had been laughed at, underestimated, dismissed. It was for Ethan, who had chosen love over power. And it was for the woman who had once been handed a place card meant to shame her. As the wind lifted my hair, I heard my own voice inside, steady now. Dignity is not something to beg for. Dignity is not for sale. Dignity is lived. The cruel laughter of that ballroom felt like a shadow from another life. The only echo that remained was the promise I had made in ink, tucked inside a photo album. My son will not grow up in pity. He will grow up in dignity. And he had. So, friend, before this story closes, let me ask you something. If it were you, would you have answered those 18 calls? Would you have listened, hoping for explanations? Or would you have chosen silence, as I did, knowing that silence itself can be an answer? Before we say goodbye, we would love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle does not knock on your door. It waits quietly until you are ready to open your heart. Take care, and we will see you in the next story.